Communist.
I have waited 14 years in prison. When you ate coconut spice, we have eaten excrement and urine. Only I have to decide, not you. I speak in the name of 1 billion enslaved men. I have not feared the Nazis, I have not feared the communists, I have spoken, and I will speak here even if the court will rule otherwise. Here it is what the communists are doing, not to me. They are doing it to people with 1 billion of men. Here it is, here it is, here it is, here it is, here it is. Just look, I don't care about what anybody objects. He should object against what is happening in America, this collusion and this apathy towards those who torture Christians.
I'm Fulton Lewis. You are about to hear the truth. You will witness an historic testament to tyranny, the sworn testimony of victims like the Reverend Richard Wurmbrand and eyewitnesses to communist oppression. You, a free American, will be a courtroom witness to world communism on trial. If this report intrudes on your time and pleasure, just consider what the ordeal of tyranny has done to millions. The monstrous assault on mankind, which we call communism, began in 1917 when a little man named Lenin betrayed a democratic coalition which had won power and a chance to build a new democracy in Russia. Lenin's Bolshevik followers, by double-cross, infiltration, and intrigue, destroyed the weak but hopeful democratic patriots who had forced the imperial czars to yield authority to the people of Russia. What remained of both the czars and a true people's democracy were removed to make way for a new and greater dictatorship of the so-called proletariat, bent on world conquest through world revolution. In China, where Lenin exported his revolutionary concepts in the early 1920s, a communist named Mao Zedong emerged to lead a 25-year war of subversion against a similarly weak but democratically directed government instituted by Sun Yat-sen and Chiang Kai-shek.
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you are about to give in this cause shall be the truth, the whole truth?
A Belgian Roman Catholic priest, Father Raymond de Jager, was a missionary in China through many of those troubled years. Today, he continues to serve the Chinese people in the Archdiocese of Taipei, capital of Taiwan, where Xiang's Republic of Free China pursues Sun Yat-sen's dreams for freeing the Chinese people from bondage. When Mao's Red followers came to Father de Jager's city on the mainland years ago, they brought a new word with them.
You say liquidate. What do you mean?
Be killed.
They kill.
Oh, they killed so many people. I was witness myself.
Did you observe any of these executions?
Sure. For instance, I give you an example. I was a good friend of General John, I will recall his name in a few minutes. He was a very, Zhang Yimwu. He was a very famous Chinese general who who had been mayor of Peking for many years. And later on, he turned educator. And he started a school in Boye, inside the limit of our diocese, and he invited me many times to go and speak at that school. He was a very good educator. Half of the day, the students, high school students, worked in the field. Half of the day, they worked in school. And he was strongly opposed to communism. So all the students of that school who could be arrested by the communists were killed. And most of these young Chinese...
Did you observe any of these killings?
Yes.
What was the method of the killing?
For instance, I observed it in a village called Poye, not Poye. In the Poye-Sian, the village is called Chengliushi. In that village, they had all the school, half of that village was Christian. So they had all the school children to be present, who had to sing patriotic songs. And we had 13 young Chinese who came. Their hands were bound behind the back, and the communists first made a speech. They said, these 13 young men are traitors. Everybody, including myself, nobody believed that they were traitors. But the communists said they are traitors, they followed the Japanese, so we must give an example to the people of the village, and we will make them kneel down and confess. None of them confessed. Then they made the 13 fellows kneel down, and one man with a sword beheaded the 13. And one stroke each. We never missed.
In the Soviet Union, executions have been a way of life for 50 years. Eugene Lyons, the senior editor of Reader's Digest, lived and worked in that country as an early admirer of Lenin's disciples. But Lyons came to see the system for what it was, and in his book, Workers' Paradise Lost, he chronicles the legacy of communism. Communists, he says, are responsible for the deaths of some 90 million people since the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917. Half of these occurred in Russia. They do not reflect World War II battle casualties. He adds, and I quote, "It staggers the imagination. They died through civil war, famines, liquidation, purges, forced collectivization, the appalling death rate in the vast slave labor camps. War on the peasants brought death and exile to 10 million. The Soviet slave labor camps claimed 50 million in Russia and the satellites of Eastern Europe. In sheer duration and dimensions, the Soviet terror has surpassed any such horrors in all history." Executions are not the only way communists enforce their paradise upon the unconvinced or racial minorities.
I'm Amadullah Danto.
Amadullah Danto is a Tibetan. He once was an interpreter for the Chinese after they invaded and occupied Tibet and claimed it as a Red Chinese territory in 1950. Later, he escaped to join his spiritual leader, the highest Tibetan Buddhist ecclesiast, the Dalai Lama. Now, in America, he speaks of the victims of communism as problems for the Chinese communists.
Of course, communists has a different ways to deal their problems. When these punishments are given, they never say that this is a punishment. They call it some sort of progressive assemblies, so-called progressive assemblies. We have this every evening, day and night. In these progressive assemblies, what we have to do is we have to confess. We have to criticize our friends. We have to confess. We have to confess what we did to wrong. What did we say anything against the communist governments? If we don't confess anything, I mean, we are not progressing. We are going to get punishment for that. If we do confess, then we have again, you are a criminal and you are being punished. Confessions are very, very tricky. They make small things very big. For instance, a person, during all these so-called progressive assembly, a person was blamed that he stole an egg. Of course, just one egg, it's a small thing, but they say that one egg becomes chicken, and that chicken becomes many eggs, and multiply many chickens and eggs. They made his crime is so big that poor guy has to suffer for his life for stealing an egg.
The nightmare that is communism to its victims is not something that happened a long time ago at a time of revolutionary excess or exceptionally cruel leadership as in the days of Joseph Stalin. Throughout the 1960s, while many in the West, including prominent leaders in the United States, have promoted détente, treaties, and trade with the Soviets and their satellites, the novelists, the essayists, the poets, the philosophers, and the musicians of the communist bloc countries have undergone a persecution as total as anything ever perpetrated by Stalin. But theirs is, for the most part, execution of the spirit rather than of the body. In 1966, Yuri Daniel and Andrei Sinyavsky were convicted of slandering the state. Daniel was sentenced to 5 years of hard labor. His wife was exiled 2 years later for protesting the invasion and occupation of Czechoslovakia. In June of 1969, Daniel wrote a letter to a friend from the Patma labor camp describing the modern techniques of communist torture aimed at the minds of political prisoners.
It seems that the words and expressions which we're accustomed to use in a well-established sense are here, once and forever, translated into a special language, the language of the camps, which is no longer Russian. In this special translation, naturally, a starvation ration can sound like education, and handcuffs like re-education. For example, you're making a mistake in thinking I am in prison. I am in educational isolation. I have not been thrown into the punishment cell, but installed in punitive isolation. And all this has not been done by guards, but by controllers. And this letter is not sent to you from a concentration camp, but from an establishment. Now, speaking of hunger strike, I do not know if you know that my comrades and I have enjoyed this entertainment. And now again, I shall have to face this business. You'll say self-destruction. Yes, I agree. You'll say lack of perspective. Possibly. You'll say it's cruel for the family. This too is true. But my dear friend, what else remains if all the thinkable and unthinkable means have been tried to obtain justice, and everything has failed?
So wrote Yuri Daniel from a concentration camp in the Soviet Union, a camp for intellectuals who offer resistance to tyranny. For a Jew, life in the Soviet Union means cultural genocide, to use the words of Dr. Joseph Dunner, international scholar and professor of political science at the Jewish University of America, Yeshiva University in New York.
The Communist Party destroys Jewish cultural life.
Specifically,
the Hebrew language is outlawed. In the whole time since October 1917, not a single Hebrew Bible, not one volume, was allowed to be printed. In that whole period, all Jewish schools that existed, either in the Hebrew or Yiddish language, or Russian, but with a Jewish context, where Jewish philosophy, Jewish history would be taught, are prohibited. Nowhere does a Russian or non-Russian in the Soviet Union get any knowledge about the entire Judaic past, about Judaism, except in the caricature of some Soviet writers who echo exactly the kind of caricature and defamation which we were accustomed from the Stürmer and similar Nazi organs during the Hitlerian period. There was a book just a few years ago published by the state publishing house, in other words, with the connivance of the Soviet government. Judaism without embellishment. And the cartoons in that book could have appeared in the Völkische Beobachter or the Stürmer. The same Nazi propaganda.
For a satellite in Eastern Europe to want just a taste of freedom is more than the Kremlin can tolerate. Czechoslovakia in 1968 is a story the world knows only too well. Despite that happy optimism of wishful thinkers who kept insisting the Soviet Union didn't want to dominate world communism, who tried to persuade America and the rest of the West that communism in Russia was mellowing, moderating, looking for rapprochement and friendship with us, just the suggestion of free speech and free press in Prague brought the Warsaw Pact armies, the Soviet KGB, secret police, and the masters of the Kremlin down on the Czechoslovak people in force. Then came the Brezhnev doctrine that no communist in a red satellite could depart from the interest of the party as established in the Soviet Union without risking punishment. What happened in Prague in '68 had happened not long before, but with far more cruelty and bloodshed in Hungary. Dr. Nicholas Nyarati, the Director of International Studies at Bradley University and former cabinet officer in Hungary, describes the events in 1956.
Happened in Hungary. What basically happened was that when the Hungarian people had no more possibility to vote, then finally they decided on October 23rd, 1956, to rise and to vote with the Tommy guns, with the Molotov cocktails, with the clubs, and with their fists, with which they battled the Soviet tanks. I know it from first-hand depositions from these refugees that at that time more than 600 Russian tanks were destroyed on the streets of Budapest, and the Soviet Union was able to stamp out the Hungarian Revolution in a bloodbath only when in the morning of November 4th, 1956, a Soviet army commanded by Field Marshal Georgy Zhukov, consisting of 200,000 men and 6,000 tanks, crashed into Hungary, killed up to 70,000 Hungarian young people between the age of 9 and 19, whose tombstones can be still seen in Hungarian cemeteries today. I have seen the photographs, and stamped out the Hungarian Revolution in a bloodbath.
Such is communism's record of crimes against humanity, of betrayal, deceit, subversion, revolution, murder, torture, and persecution. The record of turning class against class, man against God, children against parents, masses against the minorities, and the minorities against society. The legacy of horror and hate designed to destroy the very meaning of law, order, justice, and truth. In 1959, a one-time admirer of Hitler and Mussolini, a man named Fidel Castro Ruz, led a band of revolutionaries to power, publicly pledged to replace the Batista dictatorship with democracy in Cuba. Once entrenched in Havana, Castro and his cohorts laughed at the non-communist world for thinking they were anything less than dedicated Marxists. Thus did communism move in force to the Western Hemisphere. What has Castro's liberation of Cuba meant? A ruined economy, a police state, the mass importation of Soviet military advisors, technicians, and in 1962, missiles. Castro liberated Cuba so successfully that Cubans sacrificed everything, including their lives, to escape. Luis Gonzalez Grajales has fought Castro and communism in Cuba. He now heads the Cuban Resistance Aid Committee in Miami. Through an interpreter,
a total of 376,000 Cubans have arrived to this country.
Desde que el comunismo se adueñó de Cuba.
Ever since communism took over Cuba.
They have fled by the thousands in boats of every description, by airlift, by day and by night, in every conceivable manner. More than 500,000 in exile around the world out of a total Cuban population of 7.5 million, plus untabulated thousands who attempted escape from Cuba but failed. Castro, though, exported more than exiles. He helped infect Lee Harvey Oswald with the zeal which led Oswald first to campaign for the communist-dominated but now defunct Fair Play for Cuba Committee in New Orleans, and second, to an assassin's role in Dallas. Philip Abbott Luce was once an official of the pro-Peking Progressive Labor Party. He has since provided the United States Congress with vital evidence and has written and lectured extensively. Luce was once a courier to Havana to bring back the money and propaganda that would help further militancy. He was asked about his Cuban trips.
Did you meet a man named Robert Williams there?
Yes, sir, we did.
Who is Robert Williams?
Robert Williams is a former resident of Monroe, North Carolina, who's been indicted on a charge of kidnapping, came to New York rather than face trial there, fled to Canada, and from Canada was transported to Cuba.
Will you describe what Robert Williams told you and your group while you were in Cuba?
Well, Robert Williams insisted while we were in Cuba that it was important for all of us to realize that what was needed in the United States was a guerrilla operation to be led by black nationalist organizations and freedom fighters, that it was impossible working within a white power structure for the black man to ever achieve any sense or degree of freedom or security, and that what was necessary in the United States was a revolution led by the black people. Williams also gave us copies of his publication, The Crusader in Cuba, and lectured and talked with us about the necessity of advocating violence in not only the ghettos, but generally throughout the United States, in order to bring about a revolutionary situation.
Did he go into any detail about this violence?
Yes, sir, he did, both in the publications he gave us and in private talks, how it was possible to utilize servicemen who had gone AWOL to get weapons, how it might be possible to store any number of weapons and how to. He spoke of inserting acid in light bulbs to throw at the police. He spoke to us of the possibility of creating any type and number of bombs. He spoke with us at one point, as was also carried in his publication, The Crusader, of the possibility of placing dynamite in Grand Central Station during rush hour, the most effective places to put it in order to create general terror.
Herbert Philbrick, author, lecturer, and one-time FBI counter-spy inside the American Communist Party, knows the communists too well to take seriously the suggestion that they have given up in their long-repeated objective of world conquest.
Well, I read all of the communist material I can continuously today, coming from Moscow and from Prague, from Peking, China, such as the World Marxist Review and much more. And, sir, I can find no evidence at all in any of the material published, printed, distributed internationally by the communists, no evidence that the Communist Party bosses in Moscow have told their members anywhere in the world to cease or to desist in their campaign to someday overthrow and destroy the United States. In fact, the communists have been told to increase their activities, to increase their efforts to destroy the United States government.
Can it happen here? Well, consider the 1 billion men, women, and children who live not by their choice behind the iron, bamboo, and sugarcane curtains. They are a living testament to tyranny and a grim warning to those of us who live in freedom. Freedom or tyranny? The choice is ours.
The setting for Tyranny, the Legacy of International Communism, was the Court of World Public Opinion, headed by Young Americans for Freedom and Twin Circle, the national Catholic press, which presented international communism on trial at Georgetown University in February 1968.